Welcome to the Nicole Osei Report. I'm Nicole Osei, and today we're going to be talking about the fascinating studies about twins and triplets, both raised together and apart, and what those studies can show us about human development. How much does nature play a role in who we'll become, and how much does nurture play a role? And if you like this kind of content, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button that helps support my channel. And I'm so excited to be talking today with Dr. Nancy Segal. She is a professor of psychology at California State University, Fullerton, director of the Twin Studies Center, and author of 9 books and 2 on the way. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Nicole.
And as we were talking earlier, I told you that I had read Entwined Lives, and I learned that you yourself are a fraternal twin.
I am. And of course, that is the trigger for why I became so hopelessly fascinated with this topic. I was a college student and I was asked to write a paper about personal adjustment. And I decided to write about separation of twins at school, which was a very traumatic experience for me way back in kindergarten. And I just loved the literature. I loved writing about it and thinking about it. And I knew after that, when I went to grad school, twin studies would be my specialty. And I've never been disappointed.
And as I was saying earlier, I'm going to read more of your books, and the first one I read was absolutely fascinating. But I want to start with the difference between fraternal versus identical twins, just as a baseline for people who may not know.
Sure. So identical twins result when a single fertilized egg divides between the 1st and 14th day after conception. These twins share all their genes, both males, both females. In contrast, you have 2 varieties of fraternal twins. You have the same sex ones and the opposite sex ones. And they result when a woman releases 2 eggs at the same time that are separately fertilized by 2 separate sperm. So these twins share the same degree of genetic relatedness as ordinary siblings, which is half on average, 50% of their genes in common on average. Okay, so some may be closer to 0, some might be closer to 100, but about 50% on average. And as I said, you can have 2 boys, 2 girls, or a male and a female.
And I was reading, you talked about psychologists have often said that humans, we're products of our environment. And you write in your books that based on your twin research and triplet research, that it's a lot of our genetics have a part to play on who we'll become. Can you discuss that and how big of a role genetics play?
Well, there's no question that many more behaviors than we ever would have thought have some genetic component. That's not to say that anything is 100% genetic. It's not, because we find differences between identical twins as well. But many more behaviors are genetically influenced and have a stronger genetic component than we previously thought. Take religiosity, for example, how much you're invested in religion. Years ago, people thought that that was purely environmental from your family, but they were studying children, which are very much under the thumb of their parents. Once these children grew up, were free to pick their own experiences and environments, the genetic effects started to be expressed. Now, when we say something has a genetic component to it, let's take personality, about a 50% genetic influence. It does not mean that you can take a person's personality and slice it into a genetic and environmental part. What it means is that if I study personality in a group of people, then why do they differ? They differ because of environmental differences and genetic differences. And so I could say that 50% of the reason why people differ, why there are individual differences, is linked to their genes. We find that something like social attitudes has a genetic component, general intelligence, many things, job satisfaction, special mental abilities, many things that we previously thought had a much larger genetic environmental component do seem to be linked partly to the genes. Now, another point I want to make that's very important is that genes do not work in a deterministic fashion. They work in a probabilistic fashion, which means they incline you or predispose you to certain things. A good example of that is divorce. We know that genetics underlies predisposition to divorce, but your genes don't tell you to separate. You make that decision. Okay. And I should mention too that the twin study, you asked about identical and fraternal. The twin study is a very simple and very elegant way of getting at the answers to these questions. So if we compare, say, height, similarity in identical twins to fraternal twins, we will inevitably find that identical twins are more alike than fraternals. And this tells us that the genes play some role in the development of that trait, i.e. height.
And speaking of identical twins and triplets that are raised together versus apart. You write a lot about these examples in your research that shows what happens when, let's just say, a set of twins who are divided, let's say via adoption, and they come back together later, and you have found some very just, I mean, startling similarities. And one of the set of twins you mentioned are the Jim twins. Can you talk about who they are and what you found?
Well, the Jim twins, Jim Lewis and Jim Springer, were separated at birth and adopted by different families who lived about 40 miles apart in Ohio. And when they were reunited at the age of 39, they both showed some amazing similarities to one another. For example, they both used to bite their fingernails. They both described a mixed headache syndrome that developed as adolescents. They described their symptoms in exactly the same way. They both put on 10 pounds as adults inexplicably. They both married Linda, divorced Linda, married Betty. And then one divorced Betty and married Sandy. So I guess the other Betty was a little nervous at that point. Uh,
Right?
Seeing the future. They both were into woodworking. They both drove light blue Chevrolets. They vacationed in the same 3-block strip of beach in Florida. They both worked as sheriffs and part-time at McDonald's. So they had a lot of similarities. And in fact, that is the study that in 1979 launched the famous Minnesota study of twins raised apart at the University of Minnesota. And I was very privileged to join that study team in 1982, several years after it had been in progress. I was a new PhD. This was my first job as a postdoctoral fellow. And I didn't meet the Jim twins till many years later, but I met many, many fascinating, wonderful pairs of twins along the way.
And you'd also talked about a set of Colombian twins who were accidentally switched in the hospital,
Right.
raised apart, two sets, come back together. And again, can you talk about what the results you found with that set of twins? That was
Right.
also
Right.
interesting.
I'll give you a little background first for people who don't know the story, although I lay it out in my book, Accidental Brothers. So, two pairs of male identical twins were born a day apart, one set in Bogota, the capital of Colombia, and the other in a tiny village about 100 miles to the north. One of the babies up north was very sick, so when he was a day old, his grandmother brought him on the bus to the better hospital in Bogota, and he remained there a week. And when an aunt went to pick him up and bring him home, she was accidentally given the wrong baby. So
Mm.
this split two sets of identical male twins. And this was very rare because you had the same unrelated pair in different environments, one unrelated pair in Bogota and one unrelated pair up in the north. Now, this was an unusual situation, and it shows that extreme environments can overwhelm individual differences. What I mean by that is that the pairs of the two boys in Bogota were more like each other than they were like their twins. Same for the boys up in the north. Why? Because the boys in the city had access to education, culture, resources, things of that sort.
Mm.
The boys in the north didn't go past the 5th grade because their parents couldn't afford it. And that was very typical. They worked as farmers for a long time. So when they discovered this mistake, they were 25. And when I heard the story, I knew I was going there to study them. And I found that while there were many personality attributes that were very much alike, the boys, one of the pairs of twins was very outgoing, extroverted. The other pair, a little more, uh, I wouldn't say reserved, but just a little less outgoing, perhaps. Great dancers, by the way, the reserve pair. The other pair tried; they weren't quite as good, but they did a good job. But the point is that their personalities were very much the same, but their intellectual skills, of course, were largely affected by the fact that the two boys up in the north had not had a complete education.
And when I was reading about that, I was also wondering when you do the research with twins that have been separated for whatever reason or triplets, do you find that any of them say that they felt a sense of like something, a part of them was missing, or were they none the wiser until they found out?
Well, many of them do say that something was missing and that having met their twin fulfills that missing gap. But let's put this in context. There is no such thing as intrauterine knowledge of being a twin. None of these people suspected they were a twin. Many adoptees, twin or non twin, suspect that something is missing because they often don't look like their adoptive families or adoptive siblings, and maybe they look like nobody in the community if they're a different ethnic background. So something is missing, and they wonder too, why were they given up? Did their biological family not want them? Those are the kinds of questions that adoptees think about. So when you meet a twin, a close relative, but a twin who's a very celebrated relationship, it fulfills a certain aspect of what is missing. Now, we can't say for sure certain things. I mean, maybe in the womb there's a physical comfort that is experienced at some level. I mean, I don't know, because infants in the womb are sedated, they're not conscious. So many of these twins are just shocked later on in life when they discover they're a twin. They begin searching for biological family, particularly parents, and then they're shocked to discover they had a twin.
And I had also was reading about a phenomena in terms of languages, how sometimes, and because now I'm going to go to twins that were raised or triplets raised together. Can you talk about the fact that how some of them can form their own language and maybe even a body movement, and they can they understand one another on a much deeper level than
Okay,
I guess.
but let's set the record straight on that. Twins don't form a private language.
Mhm.
What they do form is a system of maybe words, certain words or expressions that they both enjoy.
Mm,
It
okay.
might be unintelligible to other people. They might communicate verbally. We also find that some near in age non twin siblings who are in close proximity might develop this kind of thing too. Now, one of the dangers of this is that it may delay normal language development in twins. And so I always advise parents to make sure that each twin has enough exposure to adults on their own. Because we find that if you observe triads of twins and a mother, and then you observe dyads of singletons and a mother, you find that the twins do get more language directed to them, but each child individually gets less than the singleton and also has less opportunity to reply because the parents have to be more controlling. It's a chaotic situation.
Oh, I can imagine, especially when they're young, as with
Yeah.
any children. And I've also read articles about twins and or triplets who say that, and these are ones that were raised together, who said that they can feel when one of their siblings is stressed or going through something. They have just an innate feeling that they need to check on their sibling. Can you talk about that? And
Well,
what have you seen in your research?
that's another thing that I'm going to just blow out of the
Is that
water.
not is that
Sorry.
not true? I mean, I
No, no. Let me just explain what happens. So
okay.
identical twins and identical triplets especially are quite close to one another on average. And so they think about each other a lot. They're in constant communication and they worry about each other. So they may worry 10 times, let's say, during a day. And then maybe on one of those days, the twin is really in danger. Aha, I knew it all along.
Mm.
We hear about the hits, we don't hear about the misses. We hear about them retrospectively. And memory can distort events. So there's no such thing, in my view, as ESP or inter-twin communication that's telepathic. I think it's a function of their close twin relationship where they think a lot alike and experience the world and process information in many similar ways.
That's very interesting. And I'm, I'm glad that you mentioned that in terms of we, the public, hear a lot about the hits and not necessarily how many times they may have thought about something and it didn't occur. So when we hear about it, it's very striking.
Sure, sure. I mean, if you're on the phone 10 times a day and the phone rings, aha, that's my twin. I mean, you're going to be correct most of the time, but it's nothing to do with ESP.
Now, are there any things in your decades of research that you found that even surprised you? Because I can imagine you've seen a lot of different things that most of the public would think are just absolutely phenomenal.
Well, I think the most surprising, actually, two. One of the most surprising findings was that identical twins raised together are as alike as identical twins raised apart in personality. And that's kind of counterintuitive because you think that the ones raised together should be more alike, but they're not. It's the same degree of resemblance. So, what this tells us is that when you live with people in a family, biological relatives, and you're alike in personality to some degree, it's due to your shared genes, not your shared environment. And we know that too because we can look at adoptees who share environments and not genes, and they're not very much alike at all in personality or in measured intelligence. So we have lots of different strategies for getting at this kind of thing. So that was a surprise. The other thing is that I have been surprised by how many idiosyncratic habits identical twins showed in common, even when they're raised apart. I can give you some examples. So we had a pair of twins raised apart till 25. And okay, when they came together, they both used Brill cream on their hair. Now that's not a big deal. Everybody in the world uses Brill cream, or at least they did in the when those guys met.
Yeah, they did.
But they both used a rare Swedish toothpaste called Vatimecum. Now, whoever heard of Vatimecum? But the fact that this was a rare similarity really tells you that some of these things may be partly genetically influenced at some level. And it gives you a way of thinking about things differently. So what goes into toothpaste choice? Is it the weird name? Is it the fact that it's fluoride free, or is it the taste? What is it? It gives you a whole new set of hypotheses for why people do what they do, because all of us have idiosyncratic habits and we think that we just acquired them randomly, but in fact we probably didn't. I know there are a lot of people who like to sit with their legs stretched out. I know I do that all the time, and I'm constantly tripping people on buses. But why do I do that? It's because my body is made that way and it's more comfortable for me.
That's a very interesting way of putting that. And speaking of more on the research, I was reading about the Dr. Am I pronouncing it correctly? Neubauer
Yes.
experiment, and that was started in the 60s. And I that case was very fascinating. And I was wondering if you could kind of detail what that experiment was about. And then I have a few questions just for people
Sure.
that may not know.
Sure. So all of that, the most comprehensive report ever is in my book, Deliberately Divided, that came out in 2021. So back in the 1960s, Dr. Peter Neubauer, who was a psychologist in New York City, and Dr. Viola Bernard collaborated on a study of twins who were separated at birth. Now, their challenge was, they said that most reared apart twin studies studied adults. They wanted to study infants and track their development in real time. That was a unique study, but the way they did it was the Louise Wise services, where Viola Bernard was a consultant. They used to service single Jewish women who were pregnant, and some of them had twins. And then the Louise Wise services would place the twins, and many moms wanted them placed together, but they separated them apart. Why? Because Dr. Bernard argued that when you place twins together, they can't develop an identity and they pose too much parental overburdening. But she said the literature of the day supported that. I've looked at all the literature in the day and there was nothing to support that. And I've spoken to psychologists who worked around then, nothing to support it. It was basically to service the research. And so we know, as I document in my book, there were 5 sets of identical twins raised apart and 1 set of triplets. And there were also several sets of fraternal twins separated who were not studied. So it's very bad science. Now, what did they do? They would visit the homes every once in a while, all in the New York City, New Jersey, Long Island area. They visit the homes fairly often when the kids were infants, a little bit less frequently as they got to be older, and eventually stopped when the kids were 12. But they would administer intelligence tests, personality tests, make videos and photographs and all kinds of tests. And they basically just collected it in an archive where it sits now in Yale, and no one can get access to it except the twins. And even then, they have to go through hoops to get approval.
What was the experiment trying to achieve, and what do you think some of the maybe shortcomings were?
Well, what they were trying to achieve is a matter of speculation. I think what they were trying to achieve was to see how different parental rearing styles interacted with the same genotype, identical twins raised apart, and look at different outcomes. And they did find that despite the differences in parenting, the children were very much the same. But you can see that they didn't have large numbers. And the work was done really poorly. They had the same investigators go to both homes. And the parents were never told they were raising a single child. It was so unethical, it's just horrendous. So they really had no research findings. I've gone through all the publications. There were enough to count on one hand. And they basically just made up these twins. They would make these composite twins, I think, because I've read enough of the stuff where some of the twins would have these attributes of a bunch of twins and try to argue this or that. There are really no findings to speak about, just a couple of case studies that I think were quite poorly done.
So when it comes to this type of research, what can you kind of talk about the what types of sample sizes you have to have in order to get a better idea of whatever question you're trying to answer, and make sure that the research that you're looking at and citing is supporting that?
Yeah, well, you certainly need more than just a couple of cases. A lot of it depends on the rarity of the twins. Reared apart twins give you a lot more statistical power than reared together twins. And it depends also on what you're looking for. But usually you want to have at least, I don't know, 40, 50, something like that. It just depends. Now that we have molecular genetic analyses, they're able to get thousands of twins in data from the genome background for these twins. Now, as I said, the Louise Wise study by Bernard and Neubauer, they wanted to do a study where they followed twins in real time from infancy. The only other study of that is one that I conducted since, using Chinese twins raised apart due to the one-child policy, where sometimes children were left in orphanages or abandoned or something like that. And many were adopted in the US, also some in Canada and Australia and England. And so I have been following these twins in real time, and it's a very fascinating study. And I do find that when it comes to general intelligence, the reared apart twins are really very similar. And despite their different educational backgrounds and sometimes different cultures, and they're just about the same as the reared together identical twins, which is my control group, also twins from China. And they are a lot more alike than what I call virtual twins. Virtual twins are same age, unrelated children raised together in the same home who replicate twinship, but without the genetic link. They're the same age, coming to the family at the same time. And as they get older, they get less alike, whereas the two twin groups get more alike.
Mm, that's interesting. And speaking of just siblings and getting more alike in that bond, I often hear people that are twins or triplets talk about the unique bond that they have that may be some of them say may be different than, as you write, singleton sets of siblings raised together. And I was wondering if you could talk about that in your own experience, and also just the research, the bond that you all share as twins.
Well, I'll talk about the research first. There are scores of studies done by different investigators, different cultures, different twins, different points in time, using different methods. And the converging conclusion is that identical twins are really the closest type of relationship you can have. Not all identical twins are close, but the vast majority are extremely close. And what they say they enjoy is the mutual trust, acceptance, non-judgmental bond that they share. They tend to be closer on average than fraternal twins who, despite being born at the same time, are different genetically. And so you find a much more variable group among them. Now, I'm a fraternal twin. My sister and I were never enemies, but we were not close growing up. We had our own sets of friends, went to different schools and summer camps. We were just very different kids, and our parents appreciated that and gave us the freedom to be ourselves. As many siblings, we got much closer as adults. We lost our parents some years ago, and we're the only children in the family. So we have a very close bond now, but I wouldn't say it's the kind that identical twins share. There are elements that are not close and many elements that are. So it's a little more of a mixed picture. And that's what we tend to find with fraternal twins. But I will also say that when you get twins together in a room, regardless of identical or fraternal, the energy goes sky high. Twins love talking to other twins. I love talking to other twins. I love talking to mothers of twins. I seem to find them everywhere. I was at the California Pizza Kitchen the other day for dinner, and there was a little set of twins sitting at the table. So, I have this eye for them, and I find them everywhere, and I love talking to them and to their parents.
Are there things that you just find in your research or just out and about, and you spot a set of twins and you talk to the families, that things that you find are just uncanny across cultures, across ages, when it comes to talking to twins and what they experience?
Well, I wouldn't call it uncanny because I think all twins' behavior falls into the category of scientific data. It's just that it's hard to believe it sometimes. And so I've been very impressed with sports, for example. You have twins who run marathons with hundreds and hundreds of other people, and yet they may score 2 seconds apart. mean, I find that just
Mm.
really extraordinary. But if you think about it, they probably have similar motivation, similar uh, physical attributes. And the usual unusual thing about identical twin athletes is that they encourage each other. So if one can do it, the other one says, "Hey, I can do it too." And so they really keep upping the ante. And what also strikes me in talking to athletes is just how selfless they are and how they enjoy a victory of one as though it's a victory for both. It's hard to imagine that because we all like our own glory, but with
Yeah.
identical twins, I've seen it over and over and over again. That doesn't matter who wins as long as one of them does.
And what advice do you have for parents of twins in terms of the best way that they can raise their children so that they will become who they were meant to be?
Well, I think that parents need to stay alert to children's individual differences, talents, tastes, and some of their weaknesses, and so they can help them get over it if you've got a shy child or something like that. But, I just can't give you a piece of advice that's going to apply to all twins because the situation psychologically and emotionally is different for identicals and same sex fraternals and male female twins and differs by same sex male and same sex female. So it's very, very different. I think that for identical twins, parents need to understand that they will want to be together for the most part and that they might enjoy dressing alike and being together, but parents need to separate them at times just so they feel like complete individuals. With fraternal twins, you don't want to force them to be alike because they're not going to be and just let them be themselves. And for male female twins, because females mature ahead of boys, females may do a little too much mothering of their twin brother. And separation there might be helpful at times to let the little boy develop and blossom on his own.
And you mentioned male female twins, and I think a lot of the conversation when we were talking, I was thinking about um, two girls, two boys, two men, two women. So when it comes to male female sets of twins, do you find that there's that similar that they also, like, if they've been raised apart, do they also show a lot of similarities in terms of maybe what they like or some idiosyncrasies that they may have?
Yeah, well, what we find is that they do. They certainly do because they're full siblings. And in most scientific analyses, people will analyze the data with same sex only, and then they'll add the opposite sex. And if there's no difference, you just simply combine them. It really depends on the attribute that you're looking for. The male female twins probably differ more, say, in birth weight or things like that than maybe same sex would. But, it's an empirical question as well.
So, in terms of twin research, triplet research, where are we at today? What are some of the things that psychologists are looking at, and some of the questions that you all want to answer?
Well, there are still a lot of unanswered questions. Probably one of the most amazing unanswered questions is why does the fertilized egg divide? Nobody really knows why that happens. We know much more about what causes fraternal twinning, but we know little about what causes identical. Oh, it does seem to run in some families. It used to be thought it was purely random. It does seem to run in some families, genetically speaking. Now, um, I'm still very interested in the twin bond and the underpinnings of that. What draws twins together? Is it the perception of similarities? I believe that's what it is. Many researchers are turning to molecular genetic analyses where we have the complete genome map for hundreds and thousands of individuals. And the interesting thing about twins, identical twins, is disease differences. Suppose we know that Alzheimer's, for example, has a genetic component to it, but one twin may experience it, the other one doesn't. What causes that gene to turn on in one twin and stay silent in the other? We also know that there are identical twins who differ in sexuality, one homosexual twin, one heterosexual twin. We also know twins where one undergoes sex reassignment surgery because that twin felt like a different gender all their life, where the other one felt fine. So, what prenatally or postnatally caused that shift? Those are questions that are important and that we can use to address these interesting issues in the non twin population.
And so, on that note, how crucial is this type of research in terms of finding more about human development and how we become who we are? It seems like, from what I've read, it's a very we can find a lot about ourselves by researching twins and triplets.
Well, absolutely. I tell everybody that twin research is not just for twins, it's a model for understanding human behavioral development in general. Now, having said that, I will say there is some twin research targeted only to twins, such as do you dress them alike? Is it helpful to put them in the same class at school? Questions like that. But more broadly, the twin research model is used to understand the genetic and environmental influences on human behavior and development and psychopathology. It's a big mistake to think, for example, as they did in the 60s, that, say, schizophrenia and autism was purely caused by the mother. Now we know that if mothers treated those children differently, it was because they were responding to those children who elicited certain responses from the parent, and that those things have genetic influences. And so if you understand the underlying mechanism for something, you're better able to treat it and address it appropriately.
And how do you feel that this research has been, I don't want to use the word accepted, but how has the public responded to it? We talked about the Neubauer experiments in the 60s, and that was controversial. And we go up to today and we know so much more. How do you think the public reacts to this type of research and what the studies have shown?
Yeah, I would say that parents of twins and twins themselves are the best human developmental psychologists I've ever run into. Parents know right away that children differ or they're alike. The public at large, I think, is beginning to be much more receptive, as are scientists, of genetic influences on behavior. But I think there are still some resistors who think that once something is genetically influenced, you can't change it. And that is not true. Behavior is an expression of genes in an environment, and modifying the environment can change genetic expression. Some traits are harder to change than others. So, for example, eye color is going to stay pretty stable regardless of where you are, unless you get tinted contacts. But for the most part, that's not going to change. But, for a physical or intellectual skill, you can practice, you can be motivated to do better, and you can modify yourself, improve and get better. We all can't be the same, nor would we want to be. The success of our population depends on different talents and different interests all coming together. What's valued in one generation may not be valued in another generation. So, I mean, to attach value judgments to certain traits, I think, is a mistake.
And for you personally, when it comes to your research and studies, what is the key thing that you want to eventually find an answer to?
Oh, so many things. I guess right now I have a study that's looking at identical and fraternal twins who are parents. And in identical twin families, the children of your co-twin are your nieces and nephews, but they're also your genetic children, because if you're genetically identical, you could have had those children too. Do you see what I'm saying?
I remember reading about that in Twine Lives. Yes, that was interesting.
Right. And with fraternal twins, it's the same garden variety aunt, uncle, niece, nephew relationship. So what I have found from that research is that identical twin parents feel much closer to their nieces and nephews than fraternal twins do. But now I would like to start a study where I do it the other way and ask the children, how close do you feel to your parent versus your aunt or uncle?
That's interesting. Yeah, that would be interesting
to turn that around the other way. But there are many, many questions I have, and I have to just. I'm also interested in my Chinese twins, and I've tested them twice in ability, and I want to test them a third time, and see how stable their similarity is relative to Chinese twins raised together.
I could talk to you for so much longer.
Thank you.
Because there's so many avenues. This is absolutely fascinating research and information. And I thank you, Dr. Segal, for joining me today.
It was a pleasure.
All right. And for you at home, whether you're watching and or listening, if you like this kind of content, please be sure to like, comment down below, and subscribe.